We're going to be working against the wind, so if it starts blowing too much. Huh? Yeah, against the wind. I like your Freudian slip there about Sunday. We can start doing every Sunday as well, so be careful what you ask for. You'll be playing twice a week. Oh boy. Thank you, Megan. Where is Megan? Oh, you're there. Thank you. You have no idea how much your presence means to the whole thing and the support you've been. I know Megan's her own journey has just been a testimony to me. Did you have a chance to mention about tomorrow? The presentation. Dr. Smith, we have tomorrow Karen presenting on, what's the title of this? Oh, plant therapy. So if you have time tomorrow, it's a free event. It's online, so anyone can join in. We have a link at 2 o'clock. Plant therapy, so I think it's going to be a recorded event. You can do it till 3 o'clock and then come here at 3 o'clock and volunteer at the farm. So just have a practical implication. We actually have the volunteer hours here on Tuesday morning and Friday afternoon at the farm. I'm trying to kind of adjust my schedule and come here on Friday afternoons. So if you want to come, put a few things in the ground, and when the weed's going to start coming, it's going to start weeding and so forth. We should have our first harvest in about 6 weeks. So the kale and lettuce and cabbage is already in the ground. I think we have onion. So we're excited to have you. This has been a kind of rough days for us, and I want to particularly acknowledge 2 people who had a difficult last week. Our heart goes to Lemaster's to Hear family. Jeff had to say goodbye to his sister last Tuesday. And Alex also had to say goodbye to his father. And this is the kind of communal grief that, and I don't know the long-term consequences of this, but we're together and we're with you, friends. And you never know when each one of us is going to experience and go through something like this, and by no means we should go through this alone. So I'm so glad to have Alex back. So it's good. We had a great week last week, and where's David? I lost him. Huh? David, it's all right. I don't want to bug him. It's okay. David is enjoying. We had the baptism for David. We had the highest online viewing. Hi, David. Hi. Are you still a member of this church? Yeah, it's been a week, so it's our anniversary. Congratulations. No, I got in trouble because of you. I asked a question. Remember the questions I asked you? All 7 of them? And I asked you a question. Do you believe if Jesus... Do you remember the question? Do you believe that Jesus is the only way for salvation for all of humanity? I mean, something like this. So apparently there are people who watch us online because somebody had the problem with that question. And you say, what about, can you anticipate the problem? I don't think I would ever hear this 20 years ago, even 10 years ago. But now it's a problem because you can't be so exclusive on Jesus. What about people who don't believe in Jesus or never heard of Jesus? I had to pause and to rethink a lot of things in a very, very short period of time. And I was amazed that our sermon series, I Am, that is all about Jesus, I think it's specifically designed to address this kind of concerns and questions. Because we need to answer, before we decide if it should be exclusively about Jesus, I think it would be important to know who Jesus was, who Jesus is, who Jesus always be. And we struggled with this question 2,000 years ago. And the text that I'm about to read very shortly clearly shows that the struggle is the same, only a little bit different perspective. 2,000 years ago, when Jesus came and introduced himself as someone who represents the Father, in the Jewish tradition, they kind of moved the Father. They made God so distant that they could not even fathom that someone who would be so human-looking have anything to do with God. They removed that the God became so, although powerful, all the reverence and all obedience, but mostly it was that distant, powerful God that's somewhere who's so much high above, and it's almost you need to work hard to follow the rules, follow the law, to please that God, to grant you salvation. That is sort of that legalistic approach to this. We're in a different situation. We still have an issue with Jesus. But our problem is not elevating God too high. Our problem is elevating ourselves so high that we distance ourselves from God, that we cannot imagine that we are so much above everything, and we're so self-sufficient, and we're so self-fulfilled, and we're so self-powerful, so smart, educated, that we don't even need God. We fulfill the dream of those who tried to build the Tower of Babel. They tried to build it high enough to reach God. We built it high enough that we left God somewhere in the distance. But the issue is the same. We're looking at Jesus asking this question. And it's a very important question, because why we need to know who Jesus was. Because we cannot have a picture or idea who God is without understanding the role Jesus played. So let me just let someone else speak for a moment. The Gospel of John. Jesus spoke to the people again, saying, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me won't walk in the darkness, but will have the light of life. Then the Pharisees said to him, because you're testifying about yourself, your testimony is invalid. Jesus replied, even if I testify about myself, my testimony is true, since I know where I came from and where I'm going. You don't know where I come from or where I'm going. You judge according to human standards, but I judge no one. Even if I do judge, my judgment is truthful because I'm not alone. My judgments come from me and from the Father who sent me. In your law it is written that the witness of two people is true. I am one witness concerning myself, and the Father who sent me is the other. They asked him, where is your Father? Jesus answered, you don't know me, you don't know my Father. If you knew me, you would also know my Father. This is the gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ. Praise be to God. When I read this statement, I am the light, it brings memory of a couple years ago. I shared this with you briefly. I think I even showed a few pictures, but it's so fitting right here. My sister, who is the head of the department in the city of our hometown, she oversees all the historic buildings and places in town, so kind of protect them. And she organized for us a private tour to Odessa's catacombs. Catacombs is basically the whole city of Odessa. Those of you who travel in Europe, this is kind of common thing, especially in Rome. The whole downtown of my hometown is quite a large city. I think right now it's 1.5 million population, so it's pretty big. And the whole downtown is built out of limestone. And the limestone was taken right from underneath the ground where the city sits. So they had to go deep, because if they took it from the surface, the whole thing would collapse. But the entire building, my own home, my apartment where I grew up, is limestone, which is kind of a good, it's very easy material. And we had the tour and saw how they would take this huge saws and they would cut it out, the big blocks, and they would carry it out on the surface. So imagine that thousands and thousands of those blocks were taken out. Basically, what it does is the underground of the entire city basically looks like an empty ant colony. You have to go deep, about 100 feet, at least 100 feet deep. But there are hundreds of miles of the underground tunnels. So my sister thought it would be fun to go and tour that. So we put our hard hats and we grabbed flashlights, and a tour guide took us down there. And we looked around, and there's a little bit of, but as soon as you start making your, on the steps down, all of a sudden something starts changing. And you can guess that, first of all, you start feeling humidity, and the second, the sounds of the world start disappearing, and it's getting quieter and quieter and quieter. And it gets quiet. You feel like you're deaf 100 feet down. At a certain point, our tour guide said, now, let's go in a room and everybody turn off your flashlights. I still have a little, I've never thought I had any kind of phobias, like claustrophobia, nyctophobia, fear of darkness. And we usually, when it gets dark here on the surface, we still can orient ourselves in the space because we can hear sounds at least. But when it's 100 feet down, you know what you can hear vividly? Can you guess? You hear your own heartbeat. That's how quiet it is. But also, it's not just the physical darkness and silence, it starts getting psychologically, all of a sudden, all kinds of interesting feelings. The head starts spinning a little bit. And you kind of lose the balance. It's almost hard to stand, to make a step. You have to balancing yourself because you don't see, you don't feel anything. But the worst is not even this physical darkness, but it's kind of psychological. Because at a certain point, I get scared because all of a sudden, I start feeling that I'm disappearing in that darkness. I'm not quite myself anymore. So the theme of darkness that John talks about from the very beginning is, I think, this is what it was not uncommon for ancient people to experience darkness. For us, it's hard because we so much depended. Electricity is such a part of us. But for a lot of folk, to be dark is reality of life. And this theme of darkness goes through the entire Gospel of John. Remember, from the beginning, it says that in the beginning it was the light from God that darkness did not recognize. Very first verses. And then Nicodemus goes in the shadow of the night. He goes to see Jesus. So this forces of darkness and light. And I think what John means by that darkness, I think that sensation of disorientation. It's not necessarily physical disorientation, but spiritual disorientation. When you kind of lose your balance a little bit, and you feel like you are also losing who you are, and you feel it disappearing. So when John talks about the danger of darkness, it's not necessarily because it's uncomfortable or it's kind of reduces my level of happiness. The darkness for John is the dangerous condition when we start losing a sense who we are as a human beings, when we start losing sense who we are as a human beings to our relationship to the creator of the universe. The world did not apprehend darkness. Apprehend darkness, it means the world couldn't understand, the world could not apprehend the light because it could not understand it, but it could not conquer it. So maybe it is possible to get used to being dark. When our guide said, turn back on your lights, he was fine. We all were standing there a little bit shaken. But at that moment, at that experience, deep 100 feet down in the dark and cold darkness and the deafening silence of the catacombs, I've realized this is the first time I had experience with nothing, and it was something. When experience with nothing becomes something. Without Jesus, humanity, I believe, is faced with that experience. More and farther away we're moving from God, deeper we go into the darkness, deeper we go into nothingness. So John writes his gospel to help us to walk us through this process from disorientation to reorientation. And this I am statements are so helpful. They become like these hinges that help us to hang on our faith and understand why understanding of who Jesus is, not necessarily important for saving our souls, but actually to restore the sense of what this life is. And today's metaphor of life suggests a very simple thing, that life is light and light is life. And this is something that was not unknown to the believers who were listening to Jesus, because from the very first verses of the Bible, it says that the entire creation started with light. And to be more precise, the very first thing that there was in the universe was light. Everything that came after light. Light was before everything that there was, that was created. Light was the very first thing that was created. Everything you understand and see. And to me, it's just fascinating. And I never thought of it until I was reading this again the other day. I realized, can you imagine that God comes in and it says the earth is unformed and unshaped and dark. And to be able to see in this darkness, in shapeless nothing, to be able to see a butterfly taking off a flower, to be able to anticipate the smell of a newborn baby, to be able to experience a sunset, that was only possible because God looked at that darkness, and shining light on it starts making it all possible. So when Jesus starts saying, I'm the light of the world, this is again, this hopeful, this recreation, if you will, of the world in which we can look again, and no matter how dark, how chaotic, no matter how frustrating life can be, there is light through which we can start seeing it, and seeing the future, and seeing the possibilities, and the new creation, and the new heaven, and the new earth. It all becomes possible through seeing through that. This theme of creation, of recreation, and the earth that is so out of shape began to look like something. When God began to create the heavens and the earth was without shape or form. It was dark over the deep sea, and God's wind swept over waters. God said, let there be light. And so light appeared. God saw how good the light was. God separated the light from darkness. God named the light day and darkness night. There was evening and there was morning, the first day. First there was nothing. Darkness and chaos. And then there was light. And it was good. Jesus mentioning him being the light sent from above, brings us again this hope of seeing how this violent, unfair, and ridiculous world can again gain new life, new possibilities. And I think I'm going to defend my statement and my question that I asked David a week ago. Do I believe that Jesus is the only way to salvation? I do. But I want to nuance it a little bit. I want to explain it a little bit more. I think Jesus is the only way we can even understand salvation. And even those who don't know Jesus, never heard of Him, or don't want to hear about Him, even their salvation can only be understood because of Jesus. Knowing and understanding Creator of this world fully is impossible without understanding who is the light. Without the light, who is I Am, we can't fully grasp the light. When Jesus make this statement, and this is a very interesting part in the Gospel of John, because some theologians believe it was just kind of inserted there to make sure, just to put that hinge along other statements, just to say, you need to really start understanding who Jesus is. And the moment He says, I am the light of the world, they looked at Him and say, you're lying. You're just a liar. There's no way you can say these kinds of things, and you don't know what you're talking about. Why humanity, why people would reject Jesus? I don't know if you had this experience in your life or interacted with people who do, but I try to understand why humanity, even God's chosen ones, refuse accept God's presence in their lives, because this is who Jesus is, God incarnate, God who becomes human flesh, who starts walking alongside with us, who shares lives with us. Why would we reject that? Why are we having a hard time accepting that? In the Jewish tradition, there's the festival of Sukkot, or festival of booths. And it's usually celebrated, not usually, traditionally, it is celebrated to commemorate Israelites' exit from Egypt. And it was celebrated back then, and it is now. Do you guys build sukkah in your house? No, we should. You can grab one of those UCLA tents that just set up and have it. So actually, the observing traditional Jews this day, they actually take and they build a little hut outside of their house, and for a week they're supposed to stay there, at least eat there, right? So you built a sukkah, right? It's like a tent that they built outside. So the idea is, and you repeat the scriptures from Exodus 12, right? So when we were slaves in Egypt, when we walked out, and the idea that it's like a tabernacle in which God dwelt. But the idea was also during the celebration of Sukkah, of Sukkot, in Jerusalem they would build and raise these huge 4 big lampstands, and they would lit them up like a humongous torches. And the tradition was that every city, every house in Jerusalem would be illuminated by the light coming from those 4 torches and from 4 lampstands. But in addition, they would lit up the torches and go through the streets to illuminate. Because at the time when Israel was walking out of Egypt, in order to be able to get the momentum and escape from Pharaoh, who was chasing with the fastest, the most powerful army in the world, in the known world at the time, and they were chasing on the horses and those carriages and deadly force. So the only chance for them to escape was to travel not only during a day, but also travel during a night. So God would become this pillar of light that would guide them through the desert, through the pitch dark desert, so they can have a chance to escape from Egypt. So to remember that God's presence as that light that later, from being a pillar would become part of the Shekinah, God's glory that dwells in a tabernacle. And the tradition of Jews, and theologians believe that when Jesus was saying that, it was the time of Sukkot, or maybe it was a time of Purim and the holiday of lighting the lights that Jeff spoke of, I think, a few weeks ago, didn't you, about lights? We know that the metaphor of light in the Old Testament was a powerful testimony, and there's so much associated. There's so many psalms written about the light, and God was associated with that presence. Some of the psalms, God's law was like a lamp unto my feet. Psalm 119, I think 119, verse 105. So, we sing a song about it, your word is like a lamp, or your law is like a lamp unto my feet, or it's like my path, it illuminates my path. So God's presence was always associated with this metaphor of light. But I want to bring to you today perhaps one of my favorite comparisons and using that metaphor of light toward God that comes from Isaiah chapter 9. And you know that chapter very well because almost every Christmas we hear Isaiah chapter 9 verse 6, unto us a child is born. And we quote that almost every Christmas. A lot of us know this by memory, or at least we hear I'm sure there are hymns about it and songs about it. But it is the beginning of chapter 9 that is absolutely fascinating to me because it has something, it speaks about the light that in a kind of way that helps us understand that the power of light for Israelites was not only in the memory of the past, what happened with Moses, not only their experiences of the past, what happened to David, not only what happened during the time of a Maccabean war when there was a fight for, or I said Purim, Hanukkah, sorry. I get my Jewish holidays confused. We eat amongst ears on Purim. We celebrate when we dress up, and we celebrate Hanukkah with the lights. Sorry. So during the Hanukkah that commemorates Jewish Hasmonean fights against the oppressive Gentile kings, and getting back their temple and restoring their faith in this light that's not supposed to last even a day, was burning for a day. So all of that is part of the experience, but it has to do with the past. Isaiah is a little different. Listen to these words. Isaiah chapter 9. Nonetheless, those who were in distress won't be exhausted. At an early time, God cursed the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali. But later he glorified the way of the sea, the far side of the Jordan, and the Galilee of the nations. The people walking in the darkness have seen a great light. On those living in a pitch-dark land, light has dawned. You have made the nation great. You have increased its joy. They rejoice before you as with joy at the harvest, as those who divide plunder. Those who divide plunder rejoice. Remember that light. Remember Isaiah talking about that light that glorified the way of the sea, the far side of Jordan, and the Galilee. You need to remember that Jews were in a hard time believing and trusting Jesus. Why? Because he was not local. Where was Jesus from? He was from Galilee. That was his homeland. Where are you from? Galilee? Phew, nothing good can come from Galilee. Not according to Isaiah. He said there's this light that does something that comes from the Galilee. And here's your chance. Here's our chance to renew our awareness of God is. But God, not a distant God, not only powerful God, not only God who judges, but God who passionately cares for us. And no matter how pitch dark life can get, God can bring the light that defeats the darkness. Living without the light can quickly turn into descending into the darkness of human reality. And all of a sudden we start realizing that that underground comes out to the surface. We see beautiful, if you look at this, at my hometown, Odessa, I think it's one of the most beautiful cities in the world. It's one of the jewels. It was built by truly one of the best Italian, Austrian architects. In many ways, Odessa reminds sort of like a mini version of of Rome or Vienna. And it's quite beautiful, and there's beautiful facades and buildings and shapes. But on the surface, but underground, underneath, this dark, cold labyrinths. And this is how life might be, that outside we see the parks and beautiful places, but under the surface there are deep and cold darkness of fears and frustrations and now emotional frailty. Jesus says, I'm the light, because he tells about God who not only looks at the surface, but he wants to go deep inside and brighten our lives, not only from the outside, but from within. And the beauty of the creation not only has something to do with the big things and the universe and placing and moving. The God continues to create not only outside, but within us. I am the light of the world. The light that was there from the beginning, the light that continues to change and transform not only outside, and that brings and illuminates the darkest corners of our eyes. But there's something else. So much that these words from John come to us again. This is the message that we have heard from him and announced to you. John sticks with this theme of darkness that he continues in his letters. And he writes this message that God is light and there is no darkness in him at all. If we claim we have fellowship with him and live in the darkness, we are lying and do not act truthfully. But if we live in the light in the same way as he is in the light, we have fellowship with each other, and the blood of Jesus, his Son, cleanses us from every sin. Jesus is the life, and there is no life without light, and there is no life without Jesus. I think that's all that John is trying to tell us, and it's the simple truth. And sometimes I just get to see, and there's so much complexity in the world. But maybe if we just learn this, maybe put it on our refrigerator. Remember this simple thing: Jesus is life. There's no life without the light, and there's no life without Jesus. We can't see the light, and this is the interesting quality of light. You can't really see the light, but you cannot see without light. You can't see the light, what light makes possible to see. It's impossible to see without the light. And when Jesus says, I'm the light of the world, it helps us to develop the kind of vision that helps us to see God's creative power, God's love and care for all of creation. If we live in the light, we have the fellowship with each other, John says. What it simply means, on a very basic level, we see each other through the light of Jesus. We see each other through the eyes of Jesus. And this not only has to do with the big existential thing of the universe, not only things of the darkness of our souls on a simple level, especially now when we feel like so been distanced from one another through this horrible pandemic. We're thinking how we're going to be returning back, how we're going to approaching one another. We see so much division, so much faction in our society. The battles are raging as we speak. But how can we see each other through the life of Jesus? When Jesus says, I'm the light, he says, give it a shot. Try to see each other through the eyes, through the light of grace and mercy, willing to accept and embrace one another in the way that Jesus has done it. And I think I am the light means that there is no darkness inside or out. that Jesus cannot brighten up. And that light changes the way we see the world. And we see it now through the life of Jesus. And the very last point I want to make, because we might want to think of that light as something distant, as something we should observe, reflect, just kind of like a beautiful sunset that we watch, witness, and then go on with our lives. And this is how light, in many ways, was associated. And these metaphors that John uses not only address, as we discussed earlier, the tradition of Israel with the celebration of Sukkot, the celebration of the light of the creation, or celebration of Hanukkah, but it also addresses the role light played not only in Jewish tradition, but actually in Gentile tradition, and Greek and Roman tradition, because one of the most powerful myths and metaphors, or defining metaphors of the Greek and Roman world, was Plato's idea that our life is basically everything that happens inside the cave. Everything, we live inside the cave, and the only thing we live, the light is only what we see as shadows on the walls. Those shadows are possible because of the light outside. But basically, we are shadows. We are only shadows of something that is out there. I don't know, that does not boost my sort of self-esteem that I'm just a shadow of something. Shadow of something. How can we think of a different way? When Jesus says, I'm the light, this is not only invitation to illumine something that we would just still consider ourselves a shadow. Because in chapter 12, just a few chapters down the road, Jesus comes back, circles back to this metaphor of light. And he says, John 12:35 and down. Jesus replied, the light is with you for only a little while. Walk while you have the light, so darkness does not overtake you. Those who walk in the darkness don't know where they're going. As long as you have the light, believe in the light, so that you might become people whose lives are determined by the light. Other translations say that you become the children of the light. When Jesus says, I am the light of the world, it means you are the children of the light. You are the light. If you're with me, if you're on this, you are the light of the world. And it's given that light is a very, very complex phenomenon to grasp. Light is so many different things. From a study of science and physics, light is a wave. Light is a quantum, is a particle of sort. Light travels faster than anything else. Light is trying to understand and grasp, but we also understand that without the light, nothing can be possible. And without the light, nothing would exist. Or without the light, we would never even know that something exists. Is Jesus the only way to salvation? That I can say today with even more assurance than ever. Even when we hear so many alternatives, even we hear to say, come on, let's back it off. Let's make our religion a little bit more just kind of palpable. Let's make it a little bit more popular. Maybe it will help us to sell it better than we say, well, there's just other alternatives. But this is not the way that Jesus says when he says, I am the light. I can say that I'm sure that there will be multitudes of people who will enter the eternal life without hearing Jesus or even fighting with Jesus. We don't know. Jesus says he judges in a different kind of way. But I am convinced that all those salvation, those beautiful stories of redemption, the stories from disorientation to reorientation cannot be seen, cannot be understood, cannot be comprehended, cannot be apprehended without understanding that Jesus is the light. I remember when we got out of those catacombs, I tell you, I never was so happy to see the people in the earth. And we took the hard hats off, and the sunlight kind of licked the back of my head, and I felt like a little warmth there. And I looked around and I realized, wow, I'm so glad that I can turn off my flashlight now. I was just so happy. Just so happy, that I could see. I could see again. Amen.